Welcome back, and I'm really excited about starting off our new year and with our new art demos. And we have a wonderful artist today. Our September guest speaker, as you know, is Charlene Collins Freeman. And Charlene is a fine arts watercolorist. So not only does she do a multiple of things, she really is very good with her fine arts. But she loves to sketch. She's an art instructor. She's a sketchbook fanatic, a workshop leader, international sketcher traveler, and founder of Cloud9 Art School, located in Bothell. Charlene and her team of professional instructors teach a variety of workshops and classes to children, teens, and adults, from beginner to advanced artists, in a fun and relaxed environment. So needless to say, Charlene has dedicated her life and career to the arts. Her demo today will be on the subject of sketching and the value, foundation, and fun it adds to the development of your artist skills. So please welcome Charlene.
Hi. I want to start off by thanking you for having me here. It's an honor, and if I step away from this and you can't hear me, just signal. My voice does actually carry, so I don't even know if it'll be this.
We're signaling you're already.
Oh, okay. We'll be right up on it. So I started doing art like most people when I was a kid, and then it seems like a lot of people, as we get to our teen years, stop doing art, other things take over. And also we start disliking and judging our own artwork a lot around those teen years. And I found that in the classes I teach, I get a lot of adults that have loved it and miss it, but they stopped doing it when they were pretty young, and then either life take over, raising a family, things move on, and then they're retired and they're ready to get back into art. And that's a lot of decades to not do something you sort of love. And I think it's a pretty overwhelming proposition to think, now I have to learn how to paint, then what do I do with all these big paintings? You know, where do I go from here? So I want to bring up the idea that you could do art on a daily basis in sketchbooks instead of always thinking in terms of big finished paintings. And what that means is different for everybody. There's no one way to do a sketchbook. So I put together a little presentation of a variety of sketchbook ideas I have followed. And then up here I have some sketchbooks that you're free to come up and thumb through when I'm done speaking. And I also brought some flyers from the school, and I'll just walk you through this. If you have any questions, I'll address them at the end. I also brought up my supplies, since I think all artists are a little bit of supply junkies. And I'll share with you whatever you want to know about my supplies. But first, let's sort of talk about the history, my history with sketchbooks. So a long, long time ago, in the 80s, I went to art school, and teachers always talked about the importance of keeping a sketchbook, but I wasn't entirely sure what that meant or what I was supposed to do with the sketchbook, and nobody really addressed it. It seemed that the idea was, in your sketchbook, you work out ideas and techniques for finished paintings. And that I got. So I started doing a few of those in my sketchbook. But the truth is, I didn't really want to waste the time doing that. I wanted to get straight to the painting or straight to the finished drawing, right? So I think I assumed it was a waste of time to do sketchbooks, but I actually think I wasted a lot of time doing paintings that weren't planned out because I didn't use a sketchbook. But the sketchbook in those days was really kind of the workhorse for your real art with a capital A. But the thing is that as you start doing more and more art, what do you do with all those paintings? And you still want to do art. You can't afford to frame them all. You run out of wall space. You run out of relatives who want them. And it's hard to get into galleries. And if you're lucky enough to get into a gallery, it's hard to sell them. And so I think we start limiting ourselves. You know, I see a lot of people want to paint smaller, and you know, how many are you going to stick under your bed? So I really do like to suggest, what about keeping a sketchbook as a way to be creative daily if you want to. And the thing is, we get kind of precious about our sketchbooks, the way we're precious about our paintings. And that's not what you need to do with the sketchbook. You need to have a place in your life where you let yourself make mistakes, make ugly drawings. We all do a ton of ugly drawings and a ton of ugly paintings before we get to the good stuff. And even when you get to a level that you feel like it's sort of matching your good taste, you're still going to have bad days and bad paintings. If you're really judgmental and critical about that all the time, you're going to stop painting, or you're going to be really reluctant to do it. So if you allowed yourself, well, my sketchbook is my place to make bad pages, bad mistakes, to experiment, and occasionally a good page, then the sketchbook becomes really useful to you. But I've taught quite a few sketchbook classes, and I see people start to get just as precious about that sketchbook as they were about their paintings, right? So I've had students donate to me, just give me really nice sketchbooks they bought because it's too nice, I'll ruin it. It just makes no sense, right? If you always have to be perfect in everything you do, you're never going to learn to be good. You have to embrace the crap that you're going to create, and there's going to be a lot of it. So this was from my college days in the 80s, you know, and I'm pretending here for my teacher, I'm pretending to use my sketchbook. I really didn't know what I was supposed to do with the sketchbook. Then another way to do it, I thought, well, what if I'm willing to just do really quick sketches? Well, I don't know if I want to put those ugly things in my sketchbook. So then I start doing them on Post-its, and if I like them, then I stick the Post-it in my sketchbook, right? Makes no sense. But I'm getting better about it. Now I'm like, okay, I'm willing to do some bad drawings. Then I embrace the sketchbook as a place to learn about my materials. And if you go through my sketchbooks up here, you'll see a lot of color charts where I'm a watercolorist, so my sketchbooks tend to be ink and watercolors. And it became a place where I did color charts, and some of those are so beautiful. I ended up having a student who liked the color charts more than her art, and now she makes color charts and sells color charts. They're beautiful as works of art, right? But it became a place to get to know my materials. You know, buy a bunch of pens, buy a bunch of pencils, scribble, do all kinds of things in there, see what they can do for you. And this was another idea, so I kind of laid it out because I think I'm always thinking in terms of layout, which it borders on that trying to make it too precious thing, and I'm also kind of an orderly OCD person. So here I was trying to teach myself some color pencil stuff, and you'll see these little, they look like rows of colors, is just me making a swatch of the color pencil and the name, because I don't understand the pencils, I'm not familiar with the names. This is the place to do that kind of work. And then, you know, I finally started embracing the idea of like, oh, maybe it might help my paintings if I do some value studies in my sketchbook. We always hear the thumbnails, the value studies, and every time I read a good book on art, do your value study, and I'm like, that sounds great. I never do it. So I decided, you know what if I start putting some of those in my sketchbook? I'm still not 100% diligent, but I like the pages afterwards. I like that little painting I did there underneath that thumbnail. Not sure I would have pushed the values to that level unless I did a little thumbnail in my sketchbook. The other thing I love using my sketchbooks for is, you know, I really encourage you to find artists that you love and see if they have books out, how-to books. So I will find one of my art crushes is Charles Reed. So I go through his book, and reading it is one thing. Like if you just read it in bed, it kind of like washes over me. But if I read it and then I sit down and I do the little studies that he has in there, and I try to imitate his studies, and I write down what his suggestions are, I really start to get it in a different level than just reading it. Copy from the masters, you know, pull out some drawings, pull them up on Google. When I did this, Google didn't exist, internet didn't exist, but just going through sketches of other artists, you know, finding Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and imitate them. That's a time-honored tradition with artists, is trying to learn from the masters, doing that in my sketchbook. But that was sort of my college days, and it wasn't until I started finding sketchbook reproductions of Lewis and Clark, or naturalist sketchbooks from the 1800s, that I started to get excited about the idea that maybe sketchbooks were more than just a workhorse for capital A art. These botanical books, I find them amazing. And then in the late 80s, I came across this little book called Everyday Matters by Danny Gregory. And it really kind of changed my whole idea of sketchbooks, because in this sketchbook, he was exploring his feelings. It was almost a diary, but he did a lot of drawing in it. And some of them were pretty profound drawings, and the writing in it was pretty profound of stuff that was going on in his life. And some of them were really trivial. It was like a grocery list and a picture of an empty egg carton or something. And I love that idea that a sketchbook can sort of capture your life in a whole new way. So that for me was turning around my idea of sketchbooks. So here I start my little sketchbook, and the first thing you want to do is you want to get all your supplies, right? That's the funnest part. So head off to the store and try to find all these different supplies, and come back and I sketch my supplies. Like, this is it, this is my kit. And I figured if I put a kit together and I put it in my bag, it had to be small enough and light enough that I would take it with me all the time. Then I would be that person. I've always wanted to be that person who sketches all the time. I thought, that's it. And I think I carried it around for about 9 months before I opened my sketchbook. And the reason I think every time I was out, I kind of felt first intimidated. I thought, well, what if people come over and look and it looks really awful, right? And then I thought, well, it kind of sounds pretentious. Like, oh, I'm that person who's doing, and so there were all these excuses I came up with for not doing that. And one day I was at lunch by myself, and I was waiting for them to bring it at a Mexican restaurant, and I thought, well, nobody's really looking at me, and I'm just waiting. So I timidly got out my supplies, and I sketched the chips and salsa on the table, and nobody came over, nobody cared, and I was kind of pleased with it, and I thought, well, that was pretty easy, that went well, and waiting for my food was a lot quicker, and I was just staring at the wall. And after I did that the first time, I started sketching all the time. It's like I needed to break that ice. So then I go to a bakery and I'm sketching everything, everything, like sketch. And my process, it could be very different than yours. Hasn't really evolved much over the years, but I tend to, I think initially I would do a little pencil work, then I would switch to a waterproof ink pen. I used micron pens for a long time for that. And I would do contour study, or continuous line. That's an easy way to draw, even if it looks a little bit cartoony. I think your hand-to-eye coordination improves. So all these things were happening as I was keeping this sketchbook. I was still painting big paintings with the capital A for art, but my drawing was getting a lot better because I was sketching a lot out in the open, and I was getting really comfortable with my supplies. And what I found is my techniques were improving, and I really enjoyed the sketchbooks. Now, occasionally you're going to have really bad pages. There's something really amazing that our line doesn't lie. If you're having a bad day, even if you're a really good artist, it shows up. Like there's just stuff that comes out of your hand. When I'm working on a painting that really bugs me, and I overwork it, I try to resurrect something, I should let it quietly just go into the dark night. But with sketchbooks, I don't care if it's a bad page, you just turn the page and keep going. In my classes, I really ask people, don't rip it out, don't glue it to another page, don't hide it, because at the moment that you do that page, it seems awful and you're embarrassed, because we think art represents something about us, something personal about us, and so we're kind of embarrassed. But the truth is, if you then just turn the page and do another one, turn the page, when that book is full and you put it on the shelf, when you take it back out, that one page doesn't really matter. It just fits into, yep, that's the mood I was in that day, or it captured my skill set that day, whatever it is. It becomes a really nice way to capture your own artistic development. And then getting up early in the morning and just, the question of, what am I going to sketch? Well, you can sketch anything. Again, don't feel like it has to be something classical every time that you have to set up these beautiful orchids or something, to sketch. So I'll get up, and while the coffee's brewing, I'll just sketch the coffee pot or the creamer or my dog sleeping. And then it became a really, so it's kind of evolving for me. It became a really fun way to capture things going on in our family. Things that I would think I would forget if I wasn't sketching them. My husband got this wild idea that he wanted chickens and ducks at the house. So he ordered a bunch online. And it was a really fun experience because the post office left a note at my door that there was a package for us. And I went to the post office. And I live in Bothell and Kenmore, really small post offices, and everybody's kind of laughing because you can hear all this like chirping in the back. And I thought, I'm standing on like, that's for me. And so we got it, and sure enough, they ship them to you in a box with holes in it. And so I went home and I sketched it right away. And then when they were quite a bit older, I went out and I photographed them, and then I worked from my photo. And I really love this spread. This was years ago. We don't have the chickens and ducks anymore. But every time I see this spread, it just makes me giggle. It's not something I would even think about anymore. So your sketchbook becomes a great way to sort of relive some experiences for you. My husband has a bunch of dead cars that he's going to one day resurrect. But this one is probably the nicest looking, and I thought this is kind of fun. I'll go out and sketch it, right? And I can't say anything because I'm always buying art supplies, and he just encourages that, so I have to look the other way with this hobby of his. This is something I call the lawn drawing. Some of my sketches are super fast, and then some I decided, what if this became a way to become really observant? And I'll set these absurd challenges for myself. And this one, I thought, I'm going to work on this sketch for an hour and a half every day for 3 days. So the first day I sketched the kitchen. And, I did it, I went straight to ink. I've sort of stopped doing the pencil first. I feel like the pencil first approach, it makes you too much of a perfectionist. And then you're spending more time drawing, erasing, and you never finish that page. So I thought, well, I think I'm just going to start going straight to ink and live with the mistakes. I can be a perfectionist maybe on my paintings, but here, just go straight to ink. What happens when you do that is you slow down your drawing because you have to live with that ink, right, on there. And my drawing got better, and my observation skills got better. So I sat in the kitchen and I drew that the first hour and a half, and I thought, yeah, I think I got the whole thing. But I had set this sort of challenge to myself. So the next day I sat down and I thought, well, what did I miss? And I started realizing I hadn't drawn anything outside the windows, and I hadn't drawn any of the hardware on the cabinets. And really the day before I thought it was a done deal. And so that was really enlightening to me that if you slow down, you see so much more. And then the third day, I started doing the watercolor and playing with that. So this was almost a 5-hour sketch. Not for everybody, and I'm not saying you should do that, but one thing that happens if you become a good, loyal sketchbook keeper is that you'll come up with ideas for how to fill your pages. And these things can really improve your art. So here I thought I had to work on paintings to get really good at being a fine artist. But actually these sketches have helped me so much more, and I'm learning the same lessons, but I'm learning them on an 8x10 page instead of a 30x22 sheet of Arches paper. Another fun idea that I came up with was, can I do recipes in here? The less words, the better, right? And in fact, I started a book at my school, and I pass it around to students. Whoever wants to take it can take it home, keep it for a month, and do an illustrated recipe in it. And at the end, I think we'll have a really awesome cookbook that everybody can have a copy of. Doing pictures from my childhood, I started thinking about what about sketching is self-discovery? What were some of your favorite books as a kid? Favorite movie I loved Pippi Longstockings, right? So these are some of my favorite books. So I started Googling those images and sketching those. Then I thought, well, what about sketching from old family photos? So here's a photo of my grandfather. I've seen it my whole life, and it wasn't until I sketched it, 50 years I've been looking at this thing. It wasn't until I sketched it that I saw he had a cigarette in his hand. And my grandfather had quit smoking by the time I came around, so this was when he was younger. So it's a fun way to explore your own personal histories. Did this black and white image of my parents when they were dating at a zoo in Rome when they used to let you pet tigers and lions. I'm sure they don't do that anymore. And then I decided, okay, I'm now going to take it out. A lot of this is sketching in the privacy of my own home, a real comfort zone. So the next step, go sketch in public. So here I went to Country Village, and I'm trying to teach myself a little thumbnail on top, trying to teach perspective to myself, and then try to really draw it out and paint it. Another one, and so I put the photo of where I was standing and back. And now this has become kind of a big phenomenon, right? Urban sketchers, maybe you've heard of urban sketchers. So that started here in Seattle with the Seattle Times artist Gabby Campanaro. And he just goes out and sketches in public. And it started in Seattle, but now it's international. It's all over the world. And I'm lucky to say Gabby teaches at Cloud9. He started teaching all these urban sketching classes. And it's become so popular. I really credit him for making sketching so popular around the world. So here's a picture of a ton of people photographing the Mona Lisa, right? And I bring this up because I travel a lot. I grew up in Italy. My family's Italian, and they still live there. So I try to go back every year as my parents are aging. They don't come here very often. And as I was going back there, I would take thousands, especially with digital cameras, thousands of pictures. And I'd come back and rarely look at them. And I had no emotional connection to these pictures. And in fact, my husband and I would both take the same exact picture standing next to each other, right? And then we come back and I'm like, did I take that or did you take that? Like, we were just so unaware of what these photos really meant to us. And it was almost like a checklist, like, oh, we have to go to St. Mark's Square and, photograph St. Mark's, and then we're going to go here and photograph that. And then we came back and it was kind of a blur of digital images that we didn't really connect with. So I decided, here are all my pictures, like they don't mean that much to me. And then a few years ago, 8 years ago, I decided this year I'm not bringing my camera, I'm just bringing a sketchbook. And I've got to tell you, it changed travel for me. I'm a big fan of travel sketchbooking. And I've started taking groups over every year because you remember my family's back there and I want to get back there every year. And I thought, well, this is getting really spendy. So what if I offer a workshop and people sign up and then I go and that's work? Then it seems more legit. So and I encourage people to take photos even when we're there, but sitting down and sketching a scene is a completely different experience than photographing it and moving on. When you photograph something, you're literally putting something between you and your experience of that thing. So since I've embraced sketchbooking, I see maybe less places in a day, but the places I see, I sit down and sketch. Sometimes it's a 15-minute sketch, sometimes it's an hour sketch. The trips really stay with me. So up here, I have a few different sketchbooks, and one is a travel sketchbook, just to give you the idea. And it could be stuff like this was the very first sketchbook I put together traveling, so I did quite a bit of collaging, and there's nothing wrong with that. So I was collaging anything. When you travel, things all seem exotic, like the candy wrappers are different, the matches are different, and this was just the little key holder for the hotel, so I put that in there. And then I started doing less and less collaging and just more and more sketching. So these are some of my images from a trip I took a few years ago. Paris, I look at this and it takes me back exactly to that day. I was sitting in the park with two of my students. Kids were playing all around us. If I didn't have this sketch, I wouldn't really remember those details. In fact, I remember some of the conversations even that we were having. I don't get that kind of memory recall from photographs. I think there's something about being in the right side of the brain and doing your drawing and settling in. It just wakens up all your senses. It becomes a more soulful way to travel. Lunch at the museum. So here I'll show you. There's the photograph, which means very little to me. And then there's a really quick sketch on the other side. That sketch, I remember. This photograph, I don't remember what year or what city I was in. That sketch, I can tell you where I was sitting. My mom was sitting right next to me. We're having ice cream. It's an amazing experience. So here is Leanna Bennett. She's the owner of Arts Umbrella, and she was on one of my trips with me. She was sketching there. So, photos, and then a bunch of the students that go on these trips with me. Little kids, it was great. So this woman signed up and she said, well, my whole family's coming. I thought, great. Well, her kids were out there sketching with us too. Those are things that maybe in their teen years they're going to be embarrassed about. But if they hold on to it when they're adults, that's a pretty awesome thing to have. Really fun stuff. So a lot of these are just the photos and then the sketch. And to me, totally different feel. Stonehenge, the photo, that sketch. And this was a really fun experience because we didn't really know. It was kind of dumb luck, but we got the last bus to Stonehenge on this day. It was sunset. There were no other tourists there. I think there were just 12 of us. And the way it's set up is you have to park your car at the gift shop, and then they bus people in, which is awesome because then there's not a bunch of cars surrounding it. You're kind of just surrounded by pastures, and it's really quite lovely. And I sat down to sketch this, and I remember the security guard coming up to me and saying, the last bus back is in an hour. And I said, yeah, we know, thanks for letting me know. I said, I'll be done. And I loved it because he just kind of looked at me and goes, yeah, I don't know you artist types. He just walked on. I love that because the sketch reminds me of that conversation, but this photo does not. I mean, just awesome experiences, right? Great way to capture it. Traveling more locally, going to DC, and then sketching these landmarks we saw, but then going back and learning a little bit about them. So this has become a way for me to learn. I just put a quote here next to Thomas Jefferson, a really famous quote. He said, love that Abraham Lincoln quote too. How many legs does a dog have if you call the tail a leg? For calling a tail a leg doesn't make it a leg. So here I sketched Abraham Lincoln, and I'm looking for some weighty Abraham Lincoln quote, and that came up, that's the one that's going in the sketchbook. And more recently, I had an adventure this past summer where my brother also lives in Italy, and he said, well, when you're done with your group, we're going to go sailing for a week, which I've never done anything like that. And I absolutely loved it. And this year, because the sketchbook is always evolving, so this year I thought, I'm going to do a lot of writing. I really want to capture the places we're going. I forget all of that stuff. So if I write it in my sketchbook, it becomes this reliable. So you can see here I started, the journey begins, and I start with these little sketches. And then, some of my favorite foods and Verona. So this is all from this past year. This is one of our groups. So over here on the table, I have a flyer of the trip we're doing next year, which is to Italy again, different cities. We'll be going to Florence, Siena, and Cinque Terre. And the way I like to set up these experiences for people is we always do the workshop first thing in the morning, we're together. But these are all adults, and everybody likes to see different things. We all have different pace and different energy level. So at lunchtime, we're done. The workshop's done, and you're free to go out and explore this world on your own, with or without your sketchbook. Some people come and they get so wrapped up into experiencing all these new cities that they don't do much in their sketchbook, and that's fine, but I always tell them, you're going to regret it. When you get back home and you only have 2 pages done in your sketchbook, you're going to regret it. So slow down, spend a little more time sketching, and go explore the world. When people sign up, I start bombarding them. Usually sign up, you have to sign up by December. By January, I start emailing people because traveling with the sketchbook and maybe traveling to Europe is a new experience for most people that sign up for this. So about every 3 weeks, I send out an email with tips about travel or how the euro works, where to exchange your money, that sort of thing. And one of the big things that always comes up is, you pack it, you carry it. That's my motto. So it's all about traveling light. And I would say that is also true for your supplies. So if you want to come up here, I'll show you some of these supplies. Let me bring them over. I think my voice carries, right, even if I'm not at the microphone. So I just want to show you some things that I use. Everybody's kit is different, but I start off mechanical pencil. I don't have to worry about a sharpener, and I don't have to worry about shavings, leaving stuff behind. This always has a nice tip on it, and a kneaded eraser. That's it as far as the pencil aspect goes. I like putting watercolor on my ink drawing, so I really searched high and low for waterproof ink. I've done micron pens. The thing is that with micron pens, the tips are pretty thin. And I'm kind of heavy-handed when I'm drawing, and so I'll bend them often. So then I started searching fountain pens. And that's a whole other rabbit hole that you can spend a lot of time in. And everybody talks about the Lamy pen, and Lamy fountain pens are beautiful, but then you have to research the different tips for them. And then you have to buy separate ink, and now you're doing a lot of like putting ink and fountain pens. It gets really messy. You're traveling with them, it can get on stuff. And then I discovered this little pen. It has kind of a funky shape. It tapers at the bottom. And this is a $10 pen that comes with a few different cartridges. And this has become my favorite pen. It's really nice and thin. And the cartridge means I don't have to carry around an ink bottle, which I'm not a fan of anyway, let alone traveling. And these cartridges just pop in, and like 2 cartridges will probably last you 6 months if you sketch as much as I do, and probably a lot longer if you don't. And it has a really skinny line, and the best part is they're completely waterproof. Micron pens have started ghosting a little bit. I'm sure their formulas change a lot on the ink, and so when I hit it with watercolor, a little bit of that ink will sort of ghost into the color. You know, if you're planning for that, you can get some beautiful effects, but if you're not expecting it, it's a disappointment.
What's the name of the pen?
Oh, so I get this on Amazon, and I think it's just called the Platinum Desk Pen. And if there's one criticism I have about it, it's just that because it has this tapered bottom, when I'm using it, I have to stick the cap in my pocket, or I have to you can't just pop it on there, right? So that's my only criticism of it. Also, if you go to my website, which is up here, charlenecollinsfreeman.com, I have a link on there, a page that's favorite supplies. And so you'll see this listed with a link to Amazon. Platinum Desk Pen.
And where did you find it?
Amazon. And you know how Amazon, if you click on something that you're going to buy, it'll give you these helpful hints of what else you might want. It'll give you the link for the cartridges if you need extra cartridges for it. I have not seen these in art supply stores.
And that's the name of the company that makes it. It's Platinum.
Platinum Desk Pen is all I can find on here. And it is my favorite. Other things include, I'll just bring them over. So that Platinum pen has a pretty thin line. And sometimes it's nice to have a thicker line. On some of my pages, I like to sort of lay it out with like a little bit of a headline on top, and then my story. Let's say, you know, ooh, going to Venice or something. I might do that big. So for that, I'll use a thicker pen. This is a Pitt pen, P-A-T-T pen. And those also come in different sizes, but I use the brush pen for that, for the thicker writing. And then I use that Platinum for all the thinner writing. There are quite a few different brushes you can get, travel brushes. And the most important thing about a travel brush is that you protect the bristles. So you don't want to just throw a brush like this into your bag. Watercolor brushes, the bristles are pretty soft. They're not as stiff as acrylic or oil brushes. So these can get damaged really easily. So travel brushes usually have a cap on them. So I don't know if you can see that, you know, from where you're sitting, but you can come up here. So this is like an encased brush, and then I take it apart. And I find short brushes kind of hard, not very comfortable to work with, but these I love because that cap screws on to the end of it, and it becomes a full-size brush. And I carry a few of these in different sizes. This brand is Da Vinci, but I'll tell you, they're a little bit spendy, and I used really cheap brushes and cheap paints for years and years sketchbooking. And then, you know, once in a while, I'm like, oh, I'm going to treat myself and like bump up to a different quality. They also sell brushes that, I think one brand is called Ninja, and then I forget what the other brands are. I think it might be Pentel, where you fill the body of the brush with water. And those are pretty inexpensive. I think those can be like $5 to $8 each, and they come in small, medium, large. They're an easy way to travel as well. They come with a cap.
What is the name of these brushes?
Ningi, N-I-N-G-I, I think it is.
Is that on your website also?
Yes, it is. It's all on my website. And if you go to the page where I think it's called Supplies and Books, you'll find they're divided. So this would be under my sketchbook supplies, my favorite sketchbook supplies. That said, I do believe like every time you take a class, the teacher's going to give you a whole brand new list of their favorite supplies. So I'm not saying my supplies are the supplies to get. I'm just saying these are my favorite supplies. But everybody sets up their own kit the way that works for them. And your kid's going to always evolve. You know, like I tend to sketch my kits in every sketchbook I do because it's always changing, either the colors in my palette or the brushes I'm using. Plus I think like a sketch of sketching supplies or art supplies is kind of fun to do. So it's not the be-all end-all. There's a lot of options out there. But for travel, you definitely want brushes that the bristles are somehow protected. And then I just carry a little container for water. Even if you get the brushes where you put the water in the body of the brush, it's not really enough to get you through a day of sketching. So a little plastic bottle, no glass when you're traveling. And then there are a lot of fun palettes out there. It's become kind of a hip thing to see how people can make their own palettes. Like Altoid tins are used a lot. You can get Altoid tins, and then you get these little like white plastic pans, and you know can glue them in there and fill them up. And then I found this really cool. It's like I think it is a business card holder, and somebody was clever enough to put metal pans in there and the little sheet of magnet in there. So I just filled these up with my favorite paints. Watercolors come in 2 paints, and it's a really small mixing area. It keeps me really crisp on color mixing and not making things muddy because you don't have a lot of room to work with. And I'll just paint a little sort of legend of what colors I have in here. You know, with watercolors, you can't really tell the color just by looking at it in the palette. So I think the lighter and the smaller your kit, the more likely you are to take it with you. And even if you do like me, where you just carry it for 6 months before you ever open it, I think just having it there is going to improve your chances of starting to use your sketchbooks. You know, I think any hobby store, or, yeah. There's a really great plastic cup you can get that is an ice cream brand, so you get the benefit of eating the ice cream. And then, it's about that tall, and then it's a really sturdy plastic cup, so it can be, and it has a cap on it. Not that you really need it, but you know, it's nice to. There's a lot of ways to get you don't have to go buy a plastic container. Some people just use yogurt containers, or whatever you have. So I know it's a good excuse to go to the art supply store. So I'm going to invite you to come up here. First, I'll take your question. Yeah.
Any suggestions for actual sketchbook?
Yeah, so the sketchbook is kind of an important part of it. If you're going to do watercolor, I recommend a watercolor sketchbook, not even a mixed media sketchbook. A lot of times mixed media is referring to just really barely wet washes on there. And a lot of the paper can sort of deteriorate and pill up on you when you start painting. So I really like the Stillman and Byrne brand. They're a little bit spendy, and that's what I have up here. Their watercolor books come in both cold press paper and hot press paper. Watercolor loves cold press. I think they go together really well, and I've read something like 70% of watercolorists use cold press paper. And it's a little bit bumpy, so the water just really love to settle into that paper. So that's called their Beta series. They have a Zeta series that is hot press watercolor paper, and hot press is really smooth. I use that almost exclusively for doing botanical studies, and one of my sketchbooks up here is a sketchbook I do botanical studies of. So I have one that's my travel sketchbook, one that I use to explore botanical art, and then I have a sketchbook up here that's just sort of everyday sketches. I try not to get too parceled out about okay, I'm gonna do one sketchbook for animals and one sketchbook for this and because then I think it gets really confusing, like which sketchbook am I gonna grab? So I tend to stick with one sketchbook for my everyday sketching, whether it's people, groceries, family, photos, experiences. Then my travel sketchbooks, I do sort of set them aside. If I'm going for an extended time, I'll do one sketchbook for the whole trip. But I also have some sketchbooks that are just like 3 or 4 pages from short trips. And then botanical, I've sort of set aside because I do use that hot press paper for that. Botanical art is like really precision based. It's almost scientific illustration-y. And so cold press paper is not really great for that with all those bumps in it. So that's why I set that aside for this. But those are my 3 categories. Other people will just put everything in one book. There's a great sketchbook artist, Kathy Johnson, and she's a big fan of, she's quite a bit older now, but I think you can still find YouTube videos of her. And she's quite the character. She became well known in the 70s because she decided to go make a log cabin by herself in the mountains. She hired somebody to come and help her build this, and she documented it in her sketchbook. And that was like sort of her first big claim to fame that people recognized her sketchbooks. But she's still an avid sketcher now, and she just believes in one sketchbook for everything. So you pick it up and everything goes in there. Your doctor's appointments, the sketch you make in the waiting room, then the really awesome sketch for your finished artwork, your grocery list, everything goes in one from start to finish. Other sketchers feel like they want to divide them up, so that's really up to you. I like the Stillman and Byrne hard books because they're constantly in and out of my backpack, getting thrown into the car, out of the car. So I kind of like that hard shell protects the pages. I don't like the spiral binding, other people do. Again, I find spiral kind of can get caught up in when I'm pulling it in and out of my bag. But also, I like doing spreads that go across the whole sketchbook, and if I have that spiral there, my hand's kind of in the way. So I don't like that. Other people really prefer the spiral because you can fold it back on itself and it takes up less room. It can be just an 8 by 10, whereas this is always going to be a full spread. They do come in soft cover too. A lot of people prefer the soft cover because they're a lot lighter. These are kind of heavy. And you don't have to use this size. I think this is actually more like a 9 by 11, but they make them in a lot smaller sizes too. And I think that if you're just starting out sketching, smaller is less intimidating. Other questions about supplies or anything else? Yes?
You get the sketchbooks on Amazon also.
You can get them in a lot of art supply stores as well. I will say I have found them to be quite a bit cheaper on Amazon. But there are a lot of individual sellers on Amazon, so it doesn't all come from Amazon. So sometimes I'll get on there and I'll Google or I'll Amazon search Stillman and Byrne, and one sketchbook will come up for $20, and the same size, different seller will be $45. So you just really want to shop around on there. These big ones that I have here usually are about $22. The other nice thing is these are truly watercolor paper, so most watercolor paper for paintings comes in 140 pound or 300 pound. These books are 180 pounds, so that's thicker than most paintings are done on, which is really awesome because if you put down a lot of ink and a lot of color, nothing shows up on the other side, and I really like that double-sided sketchbook. Yes?
2 questions. Have you ever sketched anything in your book that you liked so well and you wanted to take the page out and frame it separately?
No, but I've been asked that before if I would sell a page from the sketchbook, and I will not. Like, those sketchbooks are much more precious to me than my paintings. Yeah, there's something about, I think you just put a lot more of yourself into a sketchbook. The painting, when I'm painting, the joy for me is really the process of painting it. But once I've signed my name, I'm kind of done with that painting. Like, I'll sell it, no regrets, right? With the sketchbook, I would be really sad to lose one, or, that's a big thing. I always tell people, like, the first thing you do is stick your name and a phone number or an email address in there. You don't want to lose it. My dad's the biggest sweetheart, never asked me for anything, and he was at my house once, and he was looking, I have a shelf full of my finished sketchbooks, and he was like, these are really great, what are you going to do with them? And I thought, I was in the other room, I thought, oh God, don't ask me for one, don't ask me, because I thought he was going to ask, and I really don't want to just give my sketchbooks away. But what I have done is I will scan them all myself, tedious process, I'll clean them up, and I do reprint them. So I do have some sketchbooks that I've reproduced for people, so those I'll do. I brought a little one here that is for sale. So one of the classes I did was called the A to Z sketchbook. And I asked everybody to come up with their own theme in class of what they were going to do A to Z sketchbook on. Mine was art, but somebody else was food, somebody else was music. And the challenge is to come up with something for every letter of the alphabet that falls into that theme, and then sketch about it or write about it. And people did beautiful sketchbooks on that. You know, one was all animals, and so I brought mine, and my theme is art, so it's a lot of art-related quotes or philosophies or famous artists. And you're free to thumb through it. There's one that's not saran wrapped, and the other ones are for sale. If you wanted to cut them out, you certainly could. I think the biggest sin you could do in a sketchbook really is just ripping stuff out or gluing it so you can't see. I mean, you have to just honor that that page captured your skill set and your mood for that day, and move on. Because once you finished a book, it just doesn't matter. Yes.
Well, could you take one of your sketches from your book, and if somebody wanted another, just reproduce another thing of it?
Yes, I had a really great experience where somebody saw one of my sketches and they came back to me like a year later and said, would you reproduce that like 3 feet by 4 feet? And it was a real joy for me to do that. You know, I thought absolutely that made a lot of fun out of that commission for sure. Yes?
Do you date your pages?
I tend to date them, not every single page, but I will put dates on them. I don't date my paintings, but my pages, I think it's kind of fun to see the chronological progression of